Hello everyone and welcome. We are here at the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown on our Revolution War era farm. My name is Gretchen. I'm here today with my friends Terry and Sarah, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about a portion of the population here in Tidewater, Virginia. Actually, where we're standing in York County, Virginia, at the time of the American Revolution, they made up slightly more than half the population. We're talking about enslaved people, men, women, and children that lived and worked here in Virginia at the time. And let's get started. Gretchen, and I am out here in front of this small cabin today, which is representing what a cabin that enslaved people on a farm this size might have lived in. Today we're going to talk a little bit about inventories that still exist today from York County in the 18th century. One in particular was compiled in 1785, and this was after the death of a man named Curtis Patrick. He died around the age 50, and they did a probate inventory upon his death, shortly after his death. And what it tells us are about his belongings. He owns farming equipment, trade goods, common household items, livestock, and people. Mr. Patrick was an enslaver. He owned 8 people at the time of his death, 5 adults and what we think are 3 children. He owns a man named Ben. He owns women, Dinah, Sylvia, Mary, and Hannah, and he owns 3 other people that we are assuming are either children or possibly elderly people, or maybe somebody infirmed, and we're guessing that based on the monetary value that was placed on them. So they are Chloe and Grace and Sally. What do we know about them other than the monetary value that was placed on them and their names? If you look a little closer in the inventory, you might be able to glean a little bit more information about their lives. Mr. Patrick owned quite a bit of farming equipment, 2 yoke of oxen, 2 plows, I think 9 hoes. So was Ben working in the field all day? Did he work next to Mr. Patrick? Mr. Patrick also owned, actually he had 5 children when he died, 3 adult daughters and 2 teenage sons. Did Ben work alongside the teenage sons every day? Did he work next to teenagers knowing that they would benefit from the fruits of his labor and he might not ever, and probably didn't? The women, were they doing field work as well? They could have been, and probably were during parts of the year, but Mr. Patrick also owned quite a bit of textile production equipment. He owned a loom. He owned a flax hackle, a parcel of cards. He owned 5 spinning wheels, which is quite a bit, and 20 head of sheep. So were the women spinning all day long? 2 of the wheels they describe as linen wheels or flax wheels, which is similar to the one I have here. He also lists 3 spinning wheels. Were those great wheels or walking wheels? Probably, since they were separated from the other wheels. Those are good for cotton spinning and short stapled wool spinning. So were they doing textile production on the farm? Was Dinah the weaver? Had she taught the children how to spin? Little girls of all ages and classes learned to spin. Spinning is something that most all women in the 18th century had in common. It's not something that filled up their entire day, but probably something that they could do in the evenings or in poor weather days. Did Dinah have one of those spinning wheels at her cabin? Did she have to go to the owner's farm to do spinning? Did the very small child, Chloe, know how to card? Carding is something that very young children can do. Maybe at 2 or 3 you could teach a child to card, so that might be something that they could do and still stay close to other people who might be watching them. Did the women work all day doing this textile production and then go home and have to work their own gardens in the afternoon and the evening to supplement their diets? We don't know everything about their lives, but you can glean a little bit of more information when you study those inventories. We do know that they worked and lived here in York County, at least in 1785. We don't know if they were ever separated from each other. Had they already been separated from their loved ones? We don't know their relationship at all, except that they were here together on his farm.
Good morning, I'm Terry, and we're here out on the farm out at Yorktown, and this morning we want to talk a little bit about basket making. On the farm, basket making is going to be a chore. In Virginia, the bulk of the population are in fact farmers, and so making baskets was going to be a skill that you would have learned as a child, and you're making baskets because you need them. Baskets are not decorative, you're not making them to sell or because it's a fun thing to do. You need them to help you get your work done. They are simply working containers. You're going to make the baskets from something growing on your land. The white oak tree is here in this area. It will split very, very thin, and the wood stays quite pliable and weaves into a strong and stout working basket. So as I said, the whole family would be involved in making the baskets. The adults would be the ones to go out into the woodlot, cut the small white oak tree, bring them back and split them into the little thin pieces. Once the wood has had a chance to dry, then everyone can help weave the baskets. Children very young can weave, and the shape and the size that you make the basket is up to you. Very few baskets have a singular use, but you'll note here one of the few baskets. This is a chicken basket, and that's kind of an interesting basket because, of course, as the name implies, it's used in the chicken market. Here in Virginia, interestingly enough, the enslaved people kind of had the corner on the egg and chicken market. That was something they were allowed to do to earn a little extra money. And we even have documentation talking about owners buying eggs and chickens from their own enslaved people. So that's kind of a neat thing. You'll see that the chicken basket is kind of open. It's bad news to be in the chicken basket. You might take it to market to either sell or to buy your chickens. As I said, basket making is going to be something learned as a child. Also, we know that enslaved folk are also making baskets. So we have one very good bit of documentation about a fellow named Billy. He's taken up, unfortunately, this is in a 1780s Gazette ad, and the entire piece is not readable, but we do know that Billy is taken up and taken to jail. It's either in Charlotte or in Charles City County. You can't really read it. And he gives his owner's name, and the notice is in the paper to come and pick him up, come get him. But it also makes the comment that Billy is remarkable for his basket making skills. We also see in Mr. Jefferson's garden book, one day, I believe it's in February, that the men made baskets. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of written stuff about basket making. Most of the people who are making the baskets are not able to write or to keep that kind of diary. And it's such a common thing, you probably wouldn't really even bother to talk about it. It'd be kind of like writing to someone and telling them about washing the dishes or doing the laundry. It's just not that notable of a thing. So you make your baskets. It's going to take you a few days to get them done. Once they're done, they'll last you for a while. So it's going to be something that you might do every couple of months, every couple times a year. Not made to sell, just a farm chore.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm talking to you from a structure on our Revolution era farm. It's a cabin-like structure, and it is somewhere that most likely you would see the enslaved folks living on a farm like this one. If you pay a little bit of attention to the way that the building is constructed and the adjoining fence that surrounds their garden, you can tell that it is very simply constructed. Not using very expensive materials, not using a lot of tools, because this is something that would be constructed at a very, very limited amount of money. Not all enslaved folks in that time period were guaranteed accommodations even this nice. Usually farms that had 4 or more enslaved people would have a separate building like this dedicated to housing the enslaved folks. But occasionally, if it was a smaller number, like 1 or 2 enslaved folks, they might have to sleep in buildings that are already there, like barns and outbuildings. So if you are able to take a look inside, you'll see that it is a very, very small structure for somewhere in the neighborhood of between 4 and 6 people to live. And it's not got a lot of the comforts that you would be accustomed to even as a free farmer in the time period. So if you put yourself in their position, think about the fact that you are living here and being forced to work against your will, and you're also being forced to live in a building maybe with people that are not even related to you. On our farm, we talk most often about the inventory of a free farmer named Edward Moss, and he owned 6 enslaved people. Jesse and Lewis were 2 grown men that were enslaved, and he owned 1 grown woman. Her name was Seley, and he owned 3 children, Peter, Gracie, and Sonny. If you could imagine living in this building, we don't know if those people were related to one another. We don't know if they were a family unit. They could have been strangers, and they've got maybe a 10 by 10 foot box that they have to live in and get along with one another enough to survive. So we're gonna take a look inside, and as we do that, I want you guys to imagine being in their position and living their day-to-day life, working more than 10 hours a day, and then coming in to sleep, but also having to cook for yourself at the end of that. Also having to do things like pound your own cornmeal and that sort of thing that extend that workday well into the night, and doing that sometimes 6.5 days a week, just to really put yourself in their position. So I'm standing inside of the cabin structure on our farm that is meant to house the enslaved folks of the farm. And as you can see, I'm standing straight up, and I don't have a ton of headroom. I don't have a ton of room to move around. So if you could imagine up to 6 people sleeping in here, there's bunks on top and there's beds on the bottom. Also doing day-to-day things like cooking and storing food that you have grown in your garden in your spare time. Those types of things were common in here. You'll notice this big hole in the floor. This is something that's called a root cellar, and it's not something that's exclusive to enslaved life, but archaeological digs have discovered that most often when they find actual root cellars for the places where actual enslaved people lived, they not only have remains of food left behind, but the remains of things that were considered to be of value, whether that's monetary value or sentimental value. So again, if you put yourself in the position of these people, they don't even own themselves in the eyes of the law. So whatever small bits of comfort and entertainment that they're able to make for themselves would probably be very dear to them, and they would want to store them and take very good care of them. And the root cellar is a good place to do that. If you look around, you'll see other indications of things that they would do to pass the time. We've got a mancala board here. That's a game that originated in Africa. It's something that they brought the memory with them over on the slave ships, and when they got to the New World, they were able to reproduce that. There are also items in here of a homemade nature for entertainment, like this banjo. It's made out of a gourd and wood and an animal skin, and they were able to produce music with this. So despite having living conditions and types of circumstance that we cannot imagine today, they were still able to find ways to make the best of their situation and find small things to enjoy. And I think that's amazing.
Jump along, jump along, jump along, dear.
So one of the things that we're going to do now is check out what would have been the options for people who were enslaved on farms and there was only 1 or 2 enslaved folks. How did they live their life, and what were some of the options that they had? So now we're inside the tobacco house at our farm, and as you can see, the tobacco hangs up in here year-round because we always want to have something to show people what the tobacco looks like. But from the perspective of an enslaved person that might have to sleep here, tobacco usually only cures for about 6 weeks out of the year, and from there it would be packaged and placed in barrels, and it's going to leave the farm eventually. The sleeping arrangement over here doesn't look so bad in comparison with the other slave quarter, because he does have a little bit more room. But if you put yourself in his position, think about the fact of not having a space that is dedicated to being yours. It's not something that you have autonomy and control over. And if we're thinking about Frank from Richard Hogg's farm, we can try to put ourselves in his position. Did he have a wife at another farm nearby? Did he have children? It had to have been a very, very lonely existence for him if he was the only enslaved person for miles around and his only company was his enslaver. That had to be terribly lonely. So I think all the time of what were some of the things that he might have done to pass the time during his free time. What were some of the things that he did to bring joy, to make it through such a hard life and a hard experience. So I invite you to do the same. Put yourself in the position of these people. What did they think of when the promise of freedom was coming to America and seemingly being denied to them? What would you do in such a position? Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to like our video if you liked our content, and subscribe using the link below. Also, please feel free to join us on our other social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks.